absolutely central. This isn't just about what Alistair Darling's done, it's what you would do in the future. I just want to know, what is your target for government borrowing as a share of the economy at the end of the next Parliament? What are you going to tell the markets about that? What is your target?
I'm not going to set a target today. What I want to do is what the Governor of the Bank of England advises us to do, which is to eliminate a bulk of the structural deficit over the coming Parliament. And I think he is right, and that is the advice. After all, he's also the person who is in charge of monetary policy in this country. And I believe that is the correct judgment, and that is the judgment that we will pursue.
Alistair Darling is planning, in his plans would show it falling the structural deficit by 2/3. Is that the bulk of the deficit?
Well, when he made those comments, the Governor of the Bank then came before the House of Commons Treasury Select Committee and said, actually, we need to eliminate the bulk of the structural deficit.
What is the bulk?
Well, I'm not going to define when I have not got the formal advice of the Governor of the Bank in private conversation, and I don't have your Treasury Civil Service formally advising me. I'm not going to set some target for 5 years' time. What I'm going to do is follow the advice of the Governor of the Bank of England, who publicly actually made it pretty clear he wasn't satisfied with your fiscal judgment, Alistair.
Yes, and I think that you won't give civil service advice as to what bulk means.
It just seems bizarre that you're vesting your whole strategy on the definition of the word bulk. And we can have little discussions about whether it's the bulk of it or not the bulk of it.
Is it more than 2/3?
I have the view... I have the view that monetary policy and fiscal policy in this country should be coordinated, and it's clear that the monetary authority believes we should do more. And I agree with
the 2/3 reduction.
Why do you need to talk to the Governor of the Bank of England about this one point?
We will start sooner than you, and that is clear, because you're not prepared to make any difficult decisions in an election year, and we will eliminate the bulk of the structural deficit over the Parliament.
What is the bulk?
Right. Do you know, the Governor of the Bank of England, the person that you put in charge of monetary policy, has made it very clear that actually he was not satisfied with your fiscal plan, thought we needed to go further. I agree with him.
But the Governor of the Bank of England is in charge of monetary policy, not fiscal policy. You should be making that decision.
You talk about the markets. Let's be clear that the markets believe the most credible government that we can have in 2 weeks' time is a Conservative government with a working majority that is able to deal with these problems. And you know, if we want investment in this country, we want confidence in this country, we don't want our credit rating downgraded, which Alistair has criminally put at risk under his stewardship of the economy, then we need a government with the mandate to get things done.
OK, we were really just looking for a definition of bulk, but let's move on, see if we can get a definition of cuts. Vince Cable, you claim your party's whole posture, your posture, is that we're more honest about the cuts. We've detailed more cuts. Fact is, you've done no more detail of cuts than either of the other two parties. There's still a £30 billion hole, and you're nowhere the level required. So be honest with us and tell us where the other £30 billion is coming from.
Well, I'll explain. We start with the changes that have already been made. There have already been tax increases. What we've suggested is 15 billion. We produced detailed costs of those, of which 10 billion should go to reducing the deficit. We fully accept the premise of your question that more has to be done. There is a second wave of cuts that has to happen. And they are in areas like public sector pensions, which clearly require more work and consensus over the long term, defence cuts, which need a review. So clearly there is more to be done.
But none of your defence cuts, as you've admitted to me in another programme, would come in this side of 2015. So where do you get the 30 billion before 2015?
We've specified one, which is the Eurofighter 3B.
Though you don't know the penalties on the contract for that.
Well, working with the publicly available information, we do believe that there are savings. We know that the company, which has a vested interest in producing it, are trying to minimise.
So the Eurofighter saves you a couple of billion. In the interest of honesty, give us the other 28 billion.
Well, I'll give you the 15 billion that we've already spent.
No, but you've done that. I'm looking for the black hole.
Well, I don't know how you get 28.
Well, we need about 40 billion of cuts. You've announced 10. That leaves 30 by my arithmetic.
Let's work through the arithmetic. If you're halving the structural deficit, we're talking about half of 70. We're talking, let's say, 35, of which 20, roughly, have already happened, even if we disregard Alistair's so-called efficiency savings. There are already 20 in place. So we're talking about how you get the other 15, 20. We've identified 10 net. And we're talking about further cuts. And I've already said that there are areas like public sector pensions we haven't tried to quantify. There are defence cuts which we believe could happen following spending review, which we're not putting a figure on. But in our 15, we've been much more specific than anybody else.
Well, you made so much of honesty, and I'm really struck by this. You say repeatedly, we've identified £10 billion, that's more than either of the other parties. But you look at the 10 billion, about half of it, as far as I can see, is double counting, is things that the government's already doing. You've got £3.4 billion you're going to get from your public sector pay deal, which you admit in a footnote in your manifesto is an alternative to the government's plan. So they're already planning to get 3.4 billion. That's a third of your 10 billion already gone. How is that honest to the people when they're not actually additional cuts at all?
Well, when I talked about the 20 billion base that we were operating from, I was talking about the tax changes that the government's introduced.
But you just said 10 billion net.
Pay is on top of that, and we do recognise that ours is an alternative approach. That's quite right.
Yeah, so where does that hole in the 10 billion come from then? Because actually we seem to be down to 7,
it would save 3 billion on top of what has already been done. Yes, and it's more
actually, it wouldn't save 3 billion, Mr. Cable, on top. It's a difference to what the Chancellor, you've already proposed a 1% pay freeze.
That's right. I was going to, since Vince wants George and me on his council of whatever it is, both of us would like to know this. You said in the Chancellors Debate a couple of weeks ago that you thought that child benefit shouldn't be paid to some people. I'd just like to know the limit above which you wouldn't get it. And you've also said you want to cut back the availability of the tax credits for families. Now, I'd just like to know the limit there above which you'd start to see those cutbacks.
Well, what we've suggested specifically on child's tax credits is that high earners, and we're talking about 50,000, shouldn't get one element of the.
But to save the amount of money you've identified, you'd have to come down much lower than that, maybe below 30,000.
No, that there would be a tapering, and the tapering
would hit people there.
So there would be significant savings. And I think
therefore significant cuts.
But people earning less than 50,000 would lose some credit as well, correct?
Of course, yes. We freely acknowledge.
George Osborne.
Well, actually, can I support Alistair here? Which is, the truth is this, that Alistair, particularly as Chancellor, me as Shadow Chancellor, are under enormous scrutiny when we produce plans. And in that television debate, Vince, you said that child benefit would be cut, which, unless I misheard you.
Well, it was a misquotation. I mean, I was talking about child tax credits, and that is what I was discussing. And
you've previously come up with ideas on child benefit, haven't you?
I'm not suggesting cuts in child benefit.
All right,
but since you make the point that you're under pressure to produce numbers, why are we the only people who have produced detailed numbers in terms of cuts? You're talking generalities about efficiency and waste.
This week I received a letter from someone called Chris Tailby, who ran the anti-avoidance group at HMRC between 2004 and 2009, and he says this about your plans. The idea is that the tax savings of the size promised by Nick Clegg are achievable is, to my mind, very doubtful and really does not stand up to close scrutiny. And he says that savings from closing tax avoidance loopholes are likely to produce rather less tax than Nick Clegg's Liberal Democrats suggest. This letter has arrived. It's also been sent to a newspaper. This is the man who ran the anti-avoidance group. And to follow up, he said, almost £5 billion of yours, almost £5 billion of his plans come from
the official estimate of the Inland Revenue itself, including this gentleman, was that 40 billion of taxes are being avoided and evaded. Okay. We're suggesting saving 1/10 of that in terms of very specific measures relating to stamp duty, to the way that company tax is avoided through a complex scheme organised by banks, and in terms of national insurance payments in kind, things like private health insurance for employers.
What happens if you didn't get them because you'd already have spent the money?
What would happen if we didn't get them is that there are other elements in the tax package which the Institute of Fiscal Studies have acknowledged where we've understated probably the revenue we would get on capital gains tax.
Let's move on to tax, since that's what we have moved on to. Yeah. You are honest, Vince Cable. Some people refer to you as Saint Vince Cable.
Not me, though.
Yet no, I understand that. Nor your wife, I'm told, either. Yeah. But so far you've produced the most dishonest poster of the campaign. You criticised the Tories for secretly planning to increase VAT, yet you yourself refuse to rule it out, which is all the Tories do as well. That's not the new politics.
Well, we don't rule it out. That's quite true. And the specific purpose of that illustration was to take an issue, which was that the Conservatives have made a variety of tax promises, notably in relation to NICs and inheritance tax, the 2 million inheritance tax cut. There was no indication of how this was going to be paid for. And we said on the basis of their previous history, their preferred form of increasing taxes under the last Conservative government was value-added tax.
But you didn't say might or could, Mr. Cable. You said will, is going to happen.
is going to have to
So
happen.
it's not...
Yes,
but now you're saying it's a might or a could. Well, you might increase it as well. Mr Darling might increase it if he's still Chancellor. So I don't understand the difference.
It was a perfectly legitimate debating point to say that...
it was a debating point.
It was a perfectly legitimate debating point to make the point that if they haven't costed their own tax cuts and haven't got any ways of funding it, that they would resort to the measures that they've used in the past.
When you talk about debating points, I mean, you do seem to be quite opportunistic. You have a great reputation for being honest, but actually, at the start of this campaign, you said the increase